Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to talk about equivalent payments with simple interest. In my previous video, we introduced the concept of future value and present value, so I just want to go over those formulas. So our formula for finding future value is present value times 1 plus r times t. If you want to find present value when you know future value, you're going to use this formula. So present value will equal future value divided by 1 plus RT. So we just simply divided both sides of this formula by this factor to get this. So know when to use future value and know when to use present value. We've already discussed how to find future and present values when we know the other one, but now we're going to get into a situation where you're going to be making more than one payment. So you're going to be converting more than one value to a present or a future value. Let's take a look at the type of examples I'm talking about. In our first example, Sammy owes Kelly 2 debt payments, $1,000 3 months from now and $500 6 months from now. However, if Sammy wanted to pay off the debt today, what would the total amount be if 6% was agreed to be a fair interest rate? So instead of Sammy making those 2 payments in the future, Sammy wants to make one payment today. We cannot add these 2 amounts together because they have different time factors. Let's start off by setting up a timeline. When you're doing these types of questions, you need to make a focal date, so the date that everything is compared to. And in this case, we're going to use today as our focal date because everything's in reference from that time. So the original payment schedule is $1,000 3 months from today and then $500 6 months from today. 6% is the agreed upon interest rate, and we want to know what payment today would be equivalent to those 2 payments. So I'm going to call this value E for equal payment. Because both of these 2 payments are in the future, we want to know the present value of each of them. So we're going to use our formula for present value. And we set up our equation so that E will equal the present value of this amount plus the present value of this amount. So E will equal the present value of this amount will be the future value of $1,000 divided by 1 plus R is 0.06 and time is 3 months, so 3 divided by 12. Similarly, we want to know the present value of this future payment. So again, we use that formula. So the future value is 500 over 1 plus the interest rate of 0.06 times time, which would be 6 months, which is 6 over 12. Taking this up here, when I do this calculation, I get $985.22. When I do this calculation, I get $485.44. When I add those together, I get $1,470.66. So if Sammy pays that amount today, that will be equivalent to paying $1,000 3 months from now and $500 6 months from now. Our next example says a payment stream consists of $1,500 now and $2,000 payable 7 months from now. What is the equivalent value of the payments 3 months from now if the interest rate is 6.5%? So instead of paying this amount now and this amount 7 months from now, if we were to make one payment 3 months from now, what would that be equivalent to? Let's organize this information in a timeline. So originally $1,500 was due now and $2,000 was due in 7 months. Instead, we want to make one payment 3 months from now. So we're just going to call that E for an equivalent payment. We're going to be looking at the value of this money from this point. We're going to be looking at the value of this money from this point. So this becomes our focal date. So this payment E has to be equivalent to these 2 other payments added up. However, they have different time factors, so we have to calculate their amounts separately. Now, if we look at what this money is worth at this time point, remember this is our focal date, we're finding a future value of $1,500. So we're going to be using this formula, $1,500 times 1 plus our interest rate is 0.065 And our time factor from this point to this point is 3 months, so 3 over 12 in terms of years. Now we have to figure out what this value will be equal to at this time point at our focal date. So this is a future value compared to this. Therefore, we need to use this formula. So it will be 2,000 divided by 1 plus our interest rate of 0.065. Now be careful with the time. The time from our focal date to this date is 4 months. Now we're going to calculate each of these separately and add them. So if we carry this calculation up here, this first amount will be $1,524.38. That makes sense that that amount 3 months later will be equivalent to $1,500 previously. Then this calculation gives me $1,957.59. Again, that makes sense. That amount of money at this point in time should be less than the amount that it would be equal to in the future. When I add those together, I get a total of $3,481.96. Now you might notice if you were to add this number and this number, it would equal 97, not 96. That's because I've written this down and rounded it off. I've written this down with the rounded off value, but when I am actually doing my calculations, I'm keeping everything on my calculator and I only round off when I get a final answer. Our next example says you borrow $12,000 today and agree to make 2 equal payments. One payment 6 months from now and one 12 months from now. An interest rate of 8% is agreed upon. How much are those payments? This question is a little different than the previous 2 examples because there's 2 values that we don't know. So let's start by making a timeline. All right, so we know we're borrowing $12,000 today, and we're going to make one payment 6 months from today, one payment 12 months from today. So both of those are in reference to this date, so we're going to use this as our focal date. The problem is I don't know how much on this date, I don't know how much on this date, but it's 2 equal payments. So I'm going to call this payment X, and I'm going to call this payment X. So I'm going to be using this formula because these are future values. And even though I don't know the actual values, I can just put an X in for my future value. So I know that this amount today, which is $12,000, will be equal to the present value of this. So the present value, using this formula, will be X divided by 1 plus our interest rate is 0.08. Our time is 6/12. I do the same thing with this value. I want to find the present value of this payment. So the future value is X divided by 1 plus 0.08 times 12 months from today is 12 over 12, which is just a 1 or 1 year from today. Now let's simplify each of those terms. So moving up here, 12,000 will equal 6 over 12 is 1/2. 1/2 times 0.08 is 0.04. When I add that to a 1, I get 1.04. Plus X in the numerator, in the denominator, I'll have 1.08. 1 divided by 1.04 is 0.9615 times X. I do the same thing here. I take 1 divided by 1.08 and get 0.9259 times X. Add those together and I get 12,000 is equal to 1.8875 times X. Now we're going to divide both sides by 1.8875. And since I haven't rounded off at all during my calculations, I get $6,357.74. So if I make that payment 6 months from today, as well as 12 months from today, that's going to be equivalent to the $12,000 I borrowed today. So with all of these questions, make sure you make a timeline. And when you've got that timeline drawn, put all your information on there, and then you have to choose a focal date. Once you have that, then you're going to be able to tell whether you're going to be using your future value or your present value formula based on where the other dates are in relation to your focal date. Also remember that you can't add 2 amounts together when they have different dates. So you have to calculate each of them separately.